to the AMA session with Josy Joseph.
Hi, good afternoon. My first question, you may have got this often. Given the kind of work you do, I'm assuming you've received a bunch of threats at some point across the course of your career. How do you deal with them?
Yeah, that's one question I keep getting asked very often. So my answer is also getting very cliched. See, if you're hurting people's power, wealth, etc., obviously it will have its blowbacks. I think I deal with it. I continue to face some large court cases, etc. That's part of the package. I personally don't like to talk too much about what it is and how it happens, because a lot of journalists make the mistake of talking about themselves as the heroes of the story. Actually, we are not. We are only the flies on the wall who should be telling the stories. But yeah, if you're trying to do stories which make impact. But then it's also same as going onto the road. If you're going to be driving on the road in a country where about 150,000 people die in a year, there is risk in driving also, right? So we should leave it at that.
Great. I have a question about the manifestations of concerns over the deep state amongst the public. So in America, since Watergate and Nixon, we've seen a level of cynicism amongst the public towards the courts, towards the media, and that's sort of manifested in populist parties like the Reform Party. It's a bit of a phenomenon that we've seen that has reached a mass populace, right? So I'm curious of your thoughts about where India's public is at in terms of their knowledge of the deep state and where you see it developing over the next years.
See, in Indian public largely are victims of the deep state, and they know that. But I think what is happening in Indian context is that the political parties have managed to keep the binaries in such a way that we are unable to respond to the deep state. Instead, a part of us, a group of us, a section amongst us end up justifying or criticizing them. So this entire drama is going on while the deep state gets stronger and stronger. So I think, see, post-Watergate, if you look at what happened, was also a slew of legislations like the Foreign Corruption Prevention Act and other things. So there is a genuine democratic reform that happened in the US, which resulted in all this registration of lobbies, etc. But even after emergency, we failed to do that reform in India. Even now, despite the onslaught on institutions by Modi, we are not willing to, the people are not waking up because many of them are drunk on the Modi aura or whatever you call it. So I think we are in a state where, while we are victims, and I think every family would have at least one story of police brutality or government negligence, we are in a situation where we are slaves to the political ideological arguments, and I think it will continue for some time. But I think there will be pushback, and that pushback might be beginning, because maybe if you see the farmers' protest, how they were forced to withdraw the cases against them, not just withdraw the law. I think something might happen, but in a large democracy like ours, until the judiciary at the highest levels are strong and committed and capable of holding governments accountable, even if there is regime change, the reforms won't be lasting.
I may not have all the facts right, but I seem to recall that some years ago, a British Muslim was taken in by MI5, interrogated, then transferred to Guantanamo, and he went through 5 years of hell before being released, and his case was raised, and it went through the courts, and he was ultimately given a compensation of £800,000. Is there any such case that comes to your mind in India, firstly? And secondly, do we need cases like this to get some relaxation on the hold of the deep state?
I completely agree with you, sir, because one of the most startling things that's visible is that the police, the enforcement directorate, intelligence, etc., they only have protection in their discharge of duty upholding the Constitution of India. They do not enjoy protection for killing somebody or torturing someone, right? But in our country, we have not seen very many cases where there have been some. In fact, the most interesting aberration is in Manipur, where you have over 50 policemen on trial for killing innocents as militants about a decade earlier. Other than that, occasionally we see cases where some policemen get convicted. Otherwise, those are exceptions. It's not the norm. The second thing is that we, in the US especially, if you see, when someone is proved to be wrongly jailed or comes out, there is also a kind of financial compensation, etc. And those kind of compensations are important, especially out of those villains, officials who have crucified them. Then I think might be a good way to change the tide. Because today, I mean, when I was doing this story, some parts of my research I did not even use. For example, the entire crackdown on this organization called Student Islamic Movement of India, SIMI, after 9/11. Hundreds of cases, thousands of people, very similar sounding charge sheets. And in most of those cases, people are finally acquitted. You have ruined the young life of thousands of youngsters, right? So I'm saying that we need to bring it in. It is no, I don't think India has ever seen. I know of in medical negligence, I know cases where of Dr. Kunal Shah, where his wife was died in Calcutta about 20 years ago. Their Supreme Court awarded a 12 crore compensation for medical negligence case. Other than that, I don't seem to know, maybe I'm ignorant of such cases, but that's a very important thing, to hold officials responsible and to force them or their departments to compensate.
Yeah, so a slightly different question. I think you sort of mentioned it in the earlier session you had today. In a couple of other sessions also, I saw a lot of talk about how politicians have divided society, and they're scratching at the seams of divisive behavior, and how they're responsible for magnifying and bringing our society to where it is today. But especially in a democratic society like India, I sometimes feel that we are letting ourselves as citizens off the hook very easily, right? So when we say, so what's your view? When we blame politicians and say, Modi has done this to us, or Indira Gandhi did this to us, aren't we letting ourselves off the hook as citizens and saying, oh, we are clean, we are pure, we are wonderful people, it's those politicians, but they are us. They came from us. But we don't seem to address that elephant in the room. How would you react to that?
I mean, in theory, we should debate our individual moral moorings at par with that of the leaders. That's in theory right. But unfortunately, you and I don't rule 100 crore people. So the leaders have to be first held. These things, justice, liberty, human rights, whatever you call it, all those values will always be top down, never bottom up. Meaning, it cannot be that all 130 crore people of us become moralistic and correct, and then it flows up. No, it will never happen. I don't think it has ever happened in history. It will always happen top down. We need to fix the leaders who make the mistakes. If it is a mistake, we can forget it. But if it is something criminal, like we have been seeing very often with this government or previous ones, they need to be fixed. Modi came to power only because we as a society, media, just judiciary, agencies, etc., were able to publicly hold the Manmohan Singh government accountable for corruption and misdeeds. The same thing should happen now. And this time I hope it is not just in giving rise to another demon. I hope it gives rise to better laws, better judiciary, more reformed media, etc. So I think the debate about individual morality is, of course it is there, and large number of Indians are immoral. But I think that's not contextually very important for us today, because I don't know if any one of us want to voluntarily pay bribe to anybody, but many of us we end up paying bribe and we feel embarrassed about it. We don't even talk back home and say, look, I had to pay bribe to a constable. Why? Not because that he stopped you and you acknowledge your mistake, but because he was trying to tell you that I'm going to, I'll send your driving license to the court, you're threatening to harass you. So you, instead of avoiding harassment, you just paid the bribe. I'm saying we are being forced into situations where our citizens are being forced to bribe, which doesn't happen in most democracies, at least in developed democracies, the more liberal democracies. So I'm saying that it's an important question to ask, and something that I addressed partially in my first book, A Feast of Vultures. But I don't think it's anymore about that. It's about very simply about you, Mr. Modi, if you have come to power and you have sworn to uphold the constitution of this country, you don't have the right to go there day after day in Uttar Pradesh and talk about Aurangzeb and talk about snide remarks which dehumanizes a large sections of our community with people with Muslim names who may not be even Muslims, right? That's my argument on this. And same with whether it is Mamata Banerjee or Rahul Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi, you don't have the right to be the leader of opposition because you happen to be born in a family with the name Gandhi. You got to earn it if you are, but you don't earn it here. I don't see you on the streets. I see you on vacation. So I'm saying that today we should not. When the debate comes down to us, you and me, that is when the divisions happen. We forget and we let the big rascals get away. I have a counter to it. Mahatma Gandhi, was he a reflection of the society, or was he someone who came up and influenced all of us to be better human beings? That's leadership. So I don't think that debate, I personally don't agree with that debate. You want to be a leader, you got to do things to inspire all of us to be better human beings. You can't be a rascal and a criminal and then give us lectures over TV and radio every week saying that, we should do that, say, at COP26 at Glasgow. At the last minute, India, and supported by China obviously, scuttled the entire commitment to carbon removal, meaning, what is it? No, but the word was, no, instead of phase out, it said phased out. India forced them to use the word phased out. Do you know, it's a recorded session, right? Okay, please look at how the Supreme Court order on coal scam was scuttled by this government, and how those coal mines, and 100 of them are going to be opened up in your deep jungles now, have been given to state governments. And who is the biggest operator of those coal mines today? So there is, while we need dependence on our coal dependence for our growth, is part of the argument. It's not the complete argument. There's a deep immoral political nexus with corporates that is at play. And it's an embarrassing play.
Yeah, a related question, I think. In the afternoon also we talked about the kind of deep state and stuffs like that, and we're talking about top-down accountability versus bottom-up accountability and stuffs like that. So you have all this kind of journalistic writing, which basically kind of exposes this, and I hope it brings some amount of change in people's mind. There are also kind of a lot of literary fiction, which in a very subtle way kind of bringing the awareness of people. So kind of related question, what do you see? How do you see a change? Where is the hope? What is your kind of view of what is going to happen? Do you see that there is some kind of a bottom-up revolution which is going to happen because of the awareness? Or do you expect some Mahatma Gandhi to come down?
I don't see much hope in our generation, meaning the older ones, the beneficiaries of the economic liberalization. But I see hope in the younger people, and I think they are far more sensible than us. And I think it might be, like in many countries I've seen, it might be a youth movement which might force the system to change, because our median age is Rukmini around. I hope I'm not getting my data wrong. Our median age is less than 27, I think, because 50% of the population is less than 27. So in a young country like that, I think the change for demand will come from bottom up. You can't stop that force, that force of nature, that youth, that wild youth energy. And trust me, it is already bubbling out. So if you look at, for example, social media, at least Twitter, where I watch, I'm not very active, it is no more in the custody of a certain kind of narrative. People are pushing back. So I'm saying that the revolution might be bottom up, and we should be hopeful of revolution. I am hopeful of revolution, because otherwise I wouldn't write the book, because I'm told that Tihar jail is not a very comfortable place to stay. So it is with great optimism that I write my books.
Sir, I have a question. See, we are now into election mode in so many states, and I have lived 30 odd years in Gujarat, and I know that there's a certain pattern that take place at the time of every election, whereby a particular party never gets defeated. Can you give an insight, some in-depth information on how this mechanism works?
He has lived through Gujarat and he's asking me to give examples. You got better ones, I'm sure. But it's not the first government which has misused the deep state to set narratives. We have had several prime ministers who have tried to do that. Only thing is, it's being used at a scale that is unimaginable in the past. So many of us, and in fact all of us, knew that before 2019 elections there would be some big terrorist attack and all that. So I'm saying we all know the patterns. Now, is it genuine attack or not? I don't know. Like for example, Parliament attack, which I mentioned in my book, not in so much detail, but in relative detail. I mean, it was obvious that there is some arm of some deep state out there involved at some level with the Parliament attack. So I'm just saying that the pattern that you're talking about is very visible, obvious, no? The pattern is also obvious in the rhetoric of the political leadership. I mean, look at the Prime Minister of India rhetorically talking about religion, communal discourse on a daily basis, because in UP I think he's in trouble probably. So we should expect chaos. We should expect violence. We should expect dehumanization of certain communities, especially Muslims. We should expect some kind of maybe terrorist activities and flare-ups. These are Pulwama or whatever. So we should expect. We know. We all know. It's not that the public are fools, but the timing and at that moment, the way it appeals to our core fears is what they need. They want you to be in fear for a few days only, and they will win the elections, or whoever it is. It's not just Modi who is doing it. Others have also done it. In the emergency era, as you know, it was Naxals and others. Indira Gandhi used CIA as his great threat for a long time. So it has been used systematically, and we should expect that pattern to repeat, unless if we were to see a bottom-up revolution of youngsters getting on roads saying that, look, we don't want to see any terror attacks for the next 6 months. If anybody does a terrorist attack in this country, we'll hold the government accountable, or something like that. Otherwise, we will see things that we know.
Some announcement of temple building.
On Ayodhya.
No, I'm saying that will we see some announcement of new temple building?
We should suspect. See, one thing is very clear. I think the strongman era of Modi is the beginning of the end is very visible from the time of the farm law withdrawal and all the drama that is doing in UP, because obviously he is politically very shaken, because I think the ground feedback from UP is not good. I think that is not because of the failure of Hindutva, but because of the failure of his economic policies. There is very severe economic distress. I don't think you people are aware at all. Come to North India, come to cities like Delhi and see the economic distress on the streets. Today, you know the shoe polishing boys who will never beg you for money, today they beg you for food. There are very legitimately good-looking middle-class men and women out there trying to sell maps and things like that. And when they fail, they will tell you, sir, I haven't fed my children for 2 days. So the economic distress is very serious and very real. So his economic policy has completely collapsed. Unemployment is massive. So I think if you ask me, as a pattern, it's very visible. Modi is going back to his roots, which is what got him the strongman image in Gujarat. So we should expect more glorious temple corridors and temple reconstructions, and more pink revolutions and Aurangzebs and other things coming out of his mouth. And yeah, statues they will build, but I think the Chinese steel industry is not doing very well, so they may not be able to deliver the statues very well. So, but because he's building the Central Vista, which I think he might run out of cash to finish it. So we hope he won't leave behind capital in ruins.
Thank you. So very different set of questions. So, given your experience at Fletcher, an international affairs school rather than a journalism school, I'm curious how that shaped your view on journalism, and also whether you think in the next 20, 30 years, Indian journalists writing for Indian publications could be doing hard-hitting investigative journalism abroad, or do you think that's a pipe dream until we get our act together at home? And also, what do you make of the foreign media? Do you, as some people would contend, that it's biased or holds India to a different set of moral standards in other countries, or do you think that's all hogwash and people don't like what they're saying, so they say it's biased?
I think foreign media is relatively doing a good job. I mean, obviously you have to cater for their ignorance, because even you and I don't understand India fully well even today, right? It took me several years to realize that Gujars can be Muslims and Hindus. And it's a complex country. So, so obviously someone who's parachuting into India. But otherwise, I think they're very professional, academically sound people. And I think they're doing a good job. I don't think there is any agenda that they're as somebody who has done a postgraduate degree in international relations and related subjects, I think it helps. I think having more academic frameworks to understand what's going wrong helps you to investigate complex subjects and present them. And I think lack of academic education among journalists, especially on television, or deliberate cover-up of their educational capabilities is a big challenge. That is why you see all this generation of screaming, angers, talking rubbish. So yeah, the academic shallowness is a very real concern, and it also embarrasses people like us. You're traveling abroad, somebody's asking you questions about some TV. What I'm saying is because ultimately we are supposed to be one family, India and all that. So that embarrassment remains. So yeah, I think sometimes I feel that TV journalists should all be, and some print journalists also should all be gathered in an auditorium and given lessons, elementary lessons about politics, democracy, economics, and conversation. Yeah. And the constitution.
So because you mentioned compensation, I think Mr. Nambinarayan's case might count as a scenario where the excesses did result in compensation. But my question is basically, how complicit do you think society is in enabling these sort of tendencies, in the sense that if someone is labeled an anti-national or an urban Naxal by some what Shekhar Gupta calls commando comic channels, how willing will the neighborhood be to accept these people? Or if you're a landlord, will you give them a home? What sort of societal problems will someone slapped with a case of sedition face? And how do you see this being remedied in terms of what can we change about society so that we don't assume guilt instantly just when somebody is accused of something, especially cases like these, like you're a traitor or you're a spy or...
So on Nambinarayan, Prem is sitting there. Prem Panikar was one of the first journalists to go to Kerala and actually raise questions about the Kerala police theory. Sunday Observer? Sunday Observer. Yeah. So anyway, he turned the tide in that narrative. That's kudos to him. And because it is a frenzy. Those days it was frenzy, and nobody had the courage to challenge what Kerala police and the IB were claiming about Nambinarayan. About what you said, see, I'm not a political scientist or anything, but I think our silence is our complacency. If on your family WhatsApp group, if somebody is deliberately spreading some hatred, if you don't call out, even at the risk of being unpopular, I think then you're being part of that. So I think our silence is a very expensive stuff out there today. And you don't need to make noise every day, but making the noise in the way that is comfortable to you is very important, because our public square has been taken over by the, you might call it the comic channels. They're extremely popular in the drawing rooms of middle class Indians. I know n number of parents who watch these channels and children who resist it, who don't want to watch it. So if your father switches on and Republic TV, you must be able to tell him, Dad, you can't watch this here. So that is all part of the, so there is no one word, one solution to it. So I have disconnected my cable TV long ago because I don't think anything there to watch. So I subscribe to all the OTT platforms. But I'm saying that many of us are silent. We have been silent for far too long. And I was saying this morning, we are silent too far too long that some mediators ask such regressive questions in a CBSE question paper. So what else is happening, we don't know. So I think our silence is the problem. It is not, I mean, when a Muslim is refused a house in an apartment complex, have you ever spoken up if it is your complex? Have you ever tried to figure out what dehumanizing experience Muslims are going through? So I think it's individually about speaking up.
Hello, sir. Recent amendments regarding UAPA and giving more powers to NIA. So, what do you think? Like, are there real cases like which are coming to your mind, or like it's just happening like that? Or and one more question is that regarding the Stan Swamy case, what happened in the jail? What are your takes on it?
Stan Swamy and several others, to me, they classify as manslaughter by the state, and I hope Stan Swamy's comrades, colleagues will go to court demanding accountability from NIA and other people involved. NIA amendment, UAP amendments, etc. that you're talking, these are all ways of deeply insecure political leadership trying to find cover and strength behind the abilities of NIA and other agencies. I have personally been involved in one case where this Malayali journalist called Siddiq Kapan was arrested under UAP and jailed, and we have now seen the charge sheet. Some idiot in UP police is passing judgments about his journalism and selectively. Actually, Siddiq Kapan has interviewed a lot of BJP leaders. They have just picked out some articles written about the anti-Muslim riots and saying that he has instigated Muslims. This is what your sedition charges and UAP charges of the UP policies. So basically, a deeply immoral political leadership is empowering deeply inefficient and corrupt organizations to further subvert democracy. That's my theory. Because NIA was set up after Bombay attacks as India's premium counter-terrorism agency. If you see their charge sheet, they are a large group of stand-up comedians and sad stand-up comedians than any else that you can come across.
So you were saying you switched off your cable TV, etc. So where does an ordinary man go for news or for data? Because there is so much noise that the signal is very hard to find for a common man.
I think a common man should spend 6 months experimenting and look at newspapers and TV channels and see which one is true and which one is not. And I think a lot of basic common sense will help you figure out to figure out your reading habits and how to save your. The most important thing is, why are you wasting your precious time watching somebody who is accused of 100 crore extortion charge and spend time in Tihar jail? I'm talking about the ZTV editor, right? Why would you watch someone who is accused of instigating suicides with reasonable evidence against him, right? So I'm saying that it's all very easy to figure out. Actually, it's an overcrowded knowledge environment. So it is very easy to figure out the sources, where to read and what to read. And I think actually it's a very important question that you're asking, because if you don't know what to read, you'll end up reading all the rubbish and still don't understand the world around you. And that's what's happening to a lot of middle class urban Indians. I think they are the most ill-informed in the group.
Yeah. So we know that you're a brilliant investigative journalist, goes without saying, understatement. But I was wondering if you'd consider taking the next step into politics and actually standing for PM someday, because obviously this nation is run. No, I'm not kidding, I'm serious. This nation is run by politicians who are singularly ill-qualified for the job. They all believe in that, they belong in that uncomfortable Tihar jail you were talking about. So why don't we have someone like you at the helm? Because I know I'll cast my vote for you, and I know I'm not alone in saying this.
We are all friends, she's just kidding. You know her, no, all of you, she's a writer. Anchu Chandramouli, she writes all those novels. No, politics is the most difficult job in the world, and I don't think I'm capable of doing it on a serious note, because politics strips you of your privacies, your leisure time, all that. It's a tough job. I don't think I'm cut out for it. Second, politics also, you need to have both ability to tolerate a lot of bullshit, and you also need to have a lot of, your bullshit meter also very high. My bullshit meter is very low, and I can't tolerate too much bullshit. So I am very qualified. I think the democracy we will transition to a liberal democracy if each one of us do our job to the best possibilities. And then we will get the right leaders to emerge. For example, in 2010, 11, 12 period, I was in Times of India. I and many of us wrote many of those impactful so-called stories like Adarsh housing scam, Commonwealth Games scam, 2G related investigations, etc. And we had the Aam Aadmi Party rising up. And we were all very delighted because many of them were friends, people who were awarded and acknowledged globally. And we thought something good is coming up. But politics it corrupts everyone. I mean, look at where it has landed up. So I don't think today's politics is a place where I could, even if I want to or any one of us want to be, is a place where we can retain our sanity and values. So it is important to break down this politics, to demolish this politics, to demolish political system where parties suck in thousands of crores from the black market. And they are bigger black market operations than the drug mafias of Mexico or Latin America. I would want to, unless we break that down, unless we make the political funding transparent, our political system will not move into a more clean, transparent way. And there are very crazy patterns which I've been watching around BJP and its supporters. So BJP's biggest favor was one of the first early favors was Rafale to Anil Ambani. Anil Ambani is now bankrupt or whatever, he's facing all kinds of cases. Diwan Housing Society, we had tracked them making a massive donation to BJP in Karnataka elections. That company went bust. And if you look at many corporates who are very close to the BJP, why are they running out of cash? Why are they collapsing? It's a very important question to ask because is our political system. Same as probably with the Congress, we didn't look at it, but now one is looking at it. Is the Indian political system a vacuum operating on our market? Sucking money out of the market to buy MLAs, to pay their cronies, to pay their people, and destabilize the market. I don't know. I sometimes feel that Indian political parties are a threat to Indian democracy as they exist today. And I don't want to be part of it.
Yep. So Twitter, Google, Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, all of these are channels today of social interaction, but they have their...
We should shut them down.
Okay, yeah. So I'm getting to that. So they have their algorithmic governance, though, in Silicon Valley. And I think an interesting development is the censure of Donald Trump, which must be quite concerning, actually, for the deep state to see that such a thing could be made in a decision far away. So then the question is sort of, how do you see the relationship between where the algorithmic governance is, which is actually not in India, and the relationship of that with the Indian deep state, and maybe contrasting that with how China has approached the situation and other countries with similar situation?
See, all great technologies in their first wave emerges to enable the empire, the ones in power. So undersea cables, infield rifles, whatever, in the history, and internet as a Cold War tool, whatever you want to call it. The social media wave that we're witnessing is actually enabling the authoritarian governments, not just, including in India. If you look at Facebook or Twitter, there is very visible algorithmic biases that are there. I think we should be worried about it. But more than what, I don't know if you mentioned Instagram. You haven't mentioned, but we have been involved in some work with a network of counselors. The damage that Instagram is causing on our young children is unbelievable. It's a pandemic beyond this thing. So I think that this wave of technology created by people like us who want to buy bigger houses, bigger cars, and have a fat bank account with no regard for the health of the society and the future of society is really turning out to be deadly. If you go back and look at the violence against Rohingyas, Facebook was a very important enabler. The last wave of violence in Sri Lanka against Muslims, Facebook was an enabler. In India, WhatsApp is a carrier of death to at least 100 people in the last few years that we have seen. right? Instagram is a pandemic. Twitter, I don't know. I mean, whether it is a liberal fantasy world, which Modi has abandoned now, or seems to have. So I think all these first generation technologies need to be, you're talking about algorithmic governance in Silicon Valley. I am saying that whoever has it, without taking into consideration the basic bare necessities of progression, and that's what's important to us, right? We should not be permitting this technology on ground, and we have already unleashed a pandemic. So I don't know where it will end. And if you look at Modi and how Modi gave rise to a certain kind of conversation on the social media, you just need to look at the first 1,000 people that he followed on Twitter. And from that Twitter, today if you see, violence has gone on ground from offline, right? Online to offline. So I don't know, I'm actually scared about it, because we don't know what next technology is going to come up. And it's a true threat to democracy, all of them, no, without exception.
So how sustainable do you think is the new media model, given that governments can block funding to media by way of blocking government ads? How sustainable do you think digital platforms like, say, The Wire or Print could be in the future?
I don't know. I got my doubts, because they're very important, and I personally support all of them and subscribe to most of them. But scalability is a problem. If you are reaching only a few 100,000 people every day, it is no impact, because we are a country of 130 crore people, right? 1.3 billion people. Scalability is a big problem for all the new media startups, and that's one of the areas where I have been spending a lot of my energy and time with my own startup to figure out how do you create two things. One is that how do you see, for the mainstream media, doing adversarial investigative journalism is not part of the DNA, and it is not incentivized. Actually, not to do is incentivized, because if you don't do investigative stories, adversarial journalism, you are assured of government ads and ads from all these corrupt corporates. So that's one problem. So you need to create a different model where investigative journalism or adversarial journalism is incentivized. Second, it is not enough to just do 4 or 5 stories and write for some English-speaking Bangaloreans and Mumbaikars. We need to make it to the masses, for which I have my concern whether a Wire or a News Laundry or Caravan or Scroll or all of them are scalable. Maybe tomorrow it might be, but as of now, it looks doubtful. So we are in terms of media as an enabler of meaningful public discourse, we are in a crisis. That is why I'm saying that, the editor who was in jail for extortion is the biggest, most famous anger in Hindi belt. And he's spurning, hatred.
So I have a question. So if you see media, I think there are two divisions. There are there's media which, most of the people say is right wing. There's media which most of the people say is left wing. For example, Wire or Caravan or whatever is independent media. So why do you think there are divisions? I also personally feel that whatever is left wing media, I don't see anything positive about the opposition. Probably the BJP or, even if there is something positive. So why do you think there's a division, and why do you think we don't get a neutral news, probably?
No, there is a lot of fact to what you're saying, because those media which is called right wing is obviously the right wing we know, because in India right wing is also mixed up with a lot of fake news and fakery. The left wing media, truly a lot of media houses are left wing, or at least partially, because they are informed by the biases of upper caste biases of the newsroom, of the old lingering ideological left leanings, etc. So there is a problem. But I think to be truly independent, truly neutral, is not to balance a right winger's rubbish with a left wing explanation. That's also not fair journalism. Fair journalism is slightly expensive. It has to be informed with facts, data, investigations. So one of the problems is that we don't have the resources today in this country with any media house. I'm not talking about the mainstream media house. Most of them are actually advertisement houses. The new media houses, they don't have the money to be as fair as they want to be. Second is that many of them are unable to shed their legacies because we were also under Congress rule and left influenced academic life for a too long period. From there, instead of moving, finding the center ground, we are going to the right, where you have this glorification of the glorious past about surgery. Prime Minister is talking about, what is it? He did plastic surgery 5,000 years ago and all that crap. So we are in uncharted waters. So there is no money and a lot of it. So, and also the newsrooms are very biased in terms of, they don't realize it. To my understanding, in the Government of India has a Press Information Bureau accreditation list. I think there are about 5,000 journalists. To my understanding, there are hardly 1 or 2 Dalits accredited in this country on that list, not more. The rest are all upper caste Hindus, Christians, Muslims, all elites mostly, and others.
All right, with that we come to an end to the session. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you Josy Joseph for your answers.